Okay, this video is to help with the trip flight AP free response question. This will be going over the answer to part A. And just kind of the hardest part about this is you've got a bunch of different classes that you're dealing with. All right, and so the first one they talk about here is just the time class, and all it is it gives a time. It doesn't say how it stores in minutes and hours and date or whatever. It's just a time, and it has a method that they give a pretty good example here. That what you can use this method for is determine the difference between two times. So we have time one at 1 p.m., time two at 2:15 p.m. So if you call t1.minutes until time two, so one time object dot another time object, pass it in, it'll return how many minutes that is. All right, and if you do it in the reverse order, it'll return negative minutes. So you want the earlier time first and the later time second when you're calling that method in general. All right, and then you have a flight class, and that flight class is made up of two different methods that are basically probably two variables to representing a departure time and arrival time. So those are just two of the time objects. So we have these time objects, time class, and then you have two time objects here, one for the departure and one for the arrival time. Okay, so basically your flight, all we're keeping track of is when it departs and when it arrives, right? So you could call like the departure time, you take that dot minutes until arrival time, and that would get you basically how long that flight is, right? So a lot of this is going to be able to understand how to use these methods for the different objects. Okay, and then where we're writing our code is in a um, flight class. No, sorry, a trip class. Sorry, that consists of flights. So flight has just a departure and arrival time, and a trip has possibly multiple flights in like chronological order. Okay, and we've got to get the duration of the whole flight in part A. All right, and so just to help us make a little more sense of this, um, I took some pictures here. So if you've never been on an airline flight, um, sometimes you don't fly directly. So let's say we're going from New York to Bangkok. We might take one flight from New York to Paris, and then they have a layover. We have to wait in Paris for a little bit until the next flight starts, and then you take from Paris to Bangkok. So overall, we went from New York to Bangkok, but we had like a layover, or this is called a stopover, but oftentimes it's called like a layover um, in Paris. Like there's a connecting flight, right? So if you've never taken a flight, that's a picture of it. Also, here's the example from the question where we have all these different flights starting with 0. This one has 4 flights. And so um, on part A, what we really have to do is find the duration of the flight. So the duration is from when the first flight departs to when the last flight arrives. So we need to get these two objects, the two flight objects, get the departure time for the first one, get the arrival time for the second one, and then call the time one dot minutes until time two to figure out how long that flight is. So in this case, it looks like it'd be about 11 and a half hours from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., right? So that would be the total flight time, right? So it's just a lot of different objects. So here's the time one, flight one, right? And I didn't really make these methods do anything. I just made them so the code would compile, right? And then here's where we're going to do our trip. So I'm going to do the duration one with you here. For part A, one thing that we have to watch out for, it says 0 if there are no flights in the trip. Okay, so we are inside of this trip class, and we're doing this get duration method. So we're going to use this array list of flights. But if the size is 0, right, if there's nothing in there, then there's no flights in the trip. So we're going to assume that it's already populated and everything. But we do need to first check. So the first thing I did here was if the flights dot size. Right, so these are all the different array list methods, and if you need help with those again, you can look in that Java quick reference, but or the notes we took on array lists. So basically, if flights.size equals 0, then we want to return 0 because the duration is 0. Okay, and then if it's not, then we need to get the first and last flight. So visually, again, we need to get the first flight and the last flight. So the first flight is just the 0th flight. We can call it with get 0. So I'm going to do flight starting, I guess I can call it first flight is just flights get. And we know it'll have a 0th one because of the fact that the size at this point has to be bigger than 0. And then for the last one, we just want to do the size. So the size in this case would be 4. And then the index of the last one would be 1 less than that. So like code-wise, let's just do this first. So our last IDX, our last index, would be flights.size. Okay, but then we got a -1 from that because the size is 4, but the index is 1 less than that because we go from 0 to 3 in this case. Okay, so we're going to -1, and then the last flight then I can get by doing flights, and then the position here I'm going to get is the last IDX. Okay, so now I have the first and last flight. Okay, and then those flights again have two methods, like arrival and departure time. So I'm going to do again, maybe this visual will help. I need to do the departure time of the first flight. So I'm going to do time, our starting time is going to be first dot get departure time. Okay, and then our last time, our end time would be the last flight dot get arrival time. So when we arrive on that last flight. Right, again, this is a visual picture of it. I'm doing the difference between those two. Okay, and now I just want to call that method, the example they have there, where the total time of the trip in minutes, I think, would be, so I'm going to do int time is going to be the start time dot get minutes until. Okay, so now I'm going to do the minutes until. So from the start time until the end time. So we're using that minutes until method, which is part of the time class. All right, so again, the time class has just that one method in there. So I'm calling that, and then that should be the total minutes of the flight. So then I'm just going to return that time. Okay, so if there's more than one flight, then I will do that. Right, and please note that the first and last flight could be the same flight here. Right, it's possibly there's just one flight, and then we would get do the departure and arrival time from the first flight, and everything would work out. But this should work no matter how many flights we have. Okay, hopefully that makes sense for part A. Let me know if it doesn't.